but we'll go ahead and get started.
Take your time if you want to. It's okay.
Well, okay.
Can you hear me? I guess
Yes.
I tell you, I could take a little detour just for a minute or so. I mean, I know we're on time, but anyway, if you want to start, go ahead. But anyway,
well, I'll start us off with some prayer. How about that?
That would be beautiful.
Dear God, thank you for the people gathered here today. Teach us to show our love and devotion to one another in death as in life. Let us remember our friends who are grieving the loss of a loved one, whether recently or years ago. Help us to use the power of your love within us to serve one another. Amen. So today's subject is more about home funerals, natural burials. And I think what I'm going to do first is start out by sharing a document that has a glossary of terms, just so that we can kind of understand what some of these terms mean, because sometimes they get interchangeable and that gets confusing. So let me get that first one. Oops. I always have trouble with this, but share, you share.
There you go.
Okay. So, well, in fact, it might be at the end of here. Let's look at this first, because we've been talking a little bit about some of these terms, and we had a nice visit from a doula, Marcy Tedderon, and so you have the doula there, and sort of what that person's responsibilities may or may not be. I mean, it varies somewhat, and it also tells you some other terms that are used, like end of life doula, or that you might hear. And then there's a home funeral guide, so that we're going to talk about a home funeral and define that, but just to show you, if you do have a home funeral guide, that the roles of the doula and the home funeral guide can overlap somewhat, as also the celebrant who's officiating any service would have to have some overlap with the home funeral guide. So just to give you that picture of those items. Then we'll go back up to here. So a death and dying guide is somebody who works with a dying person and their family to accompany them throughout the death experience, whether it's in a facility or in your home. And then you have an end-of-life doula. I think those are really the same roles. I picked out these subjects from the National NHFA. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on what that means, but it's National Home Funeral Association. I'm sorry. And then you have the home funeral guide, and that's to help the families or friends care for their own dead, include educating, consulting, and guiding them through after-death care. And so that is where you get into preparing the body for burial. And rather than having it done the customary way, that you do it the way it used to be done and the way it was done for Jesus. And of course, the celebrant is, in our case, we usually think of the pastor or minister. And then you have these other terms related to the funeral and disposition terms. And I'm going to go down, and because I really right now want us to focus on what a green funeral is and what a green or natural burial is. You've heard me talk about simple burial, and in my research, I've learned that I should be using the term either green burial or natural burial, that would be, that's really more realistic as far as what it means. So a green funeral is basically when you're using organic and you're not using embalming. You may have organic non-invasive preservation techniques, locally sourced materials such as a hand-sewn shroud, that sort of thing. And then you'll see I have it in italics down below, and that just means I found those definitions in more than one place on that website. So it's also just your post-death care, minimum carbon footprint. And it says sometimes confused with the term home funeral, green burial, or home burial. But the burial part we'll get down is the final disposition of the body. And you can have, theoretically, you could have a green burial in a hybrid cemetery. In other words, part of a cemetery has the traditional casket and tombstone, and then part of it allows for a natural burial. It could be a conservation burial ground. Now that would be like Ducks Run Natural Cemetery, because they have actually been certified as a conservation burial ground. I mean, to have that designation, you have to go through a lot of processes, and it's a big deal. And it has to do not just with putting a body in the ground naturally, the way the body is. It has to also do about the land, the stormwater runoff, the ecosystem, and the other things, that you want to have good conservation practices. Or the other option is on private property. And later we're going to talk about what that might look like here at Trinity. I'm putting that out there because we have the environmental task force, and Mark has asked for to put things out there that might fit into some of the environmental initiatives. And that is one area that I would like to have available to members to talk about and think about what they might want, what we might want. So I like this green burial. I like this definition the most because it's talking about minimal environmental impact. Aids in conservation of natural resources, reduction of carbon emissions, protection of worker health, and the restoration and preservation of habitat. So you're using non-toxic and biodegradable materials like caskets, shrouds, and urns. Like your casket could be a cardboard casket. And then we'll go down to home funeral. And this term is used as a family or community directed after death care from the time of death through final disposition. It may occur in the home or other setting like a nursing home setting, and it may or may not include professional assistance, as well as a vigil, ceremony, or memorial service. Now, what I find interesting is you all probably know a lot about this. We're now using the term home funeral because years and years ago, for most places, the funeral was in the home setting and a vigil. Has anybody had an experience of being in a home funeral or or participating in a natural burial?
No.
Did you hear any of your ancestors talking about it?
We bury people, family members in a graveyard above the family farm, but all the ones that I've been to were people who were cared for at a commercial funeral home. They
Yeah.
didn't lay in the house.
Well, my daddy would talk about how he was very close to his grandfather, and um, he talked about when his grandparents died, and that the bodies were kept in the home, and the vigil was held, and not really. My sister says she's read that the vigil was held to keep the mice and rats away from the body. I have not come across that. um, but I also have come across that a vigil is held just as to be in that sacred space with the body, and to show respect and love, and just recognition that the body is still going through changes, as is the spirit. So I am going to stop that share for right now. I might leave it on there, but let's see. I might want to leave it on there. So so we know, I guess, can you kind of use your imagination and kind of picture enough about what you've learned and what you already know about having a body in the home, having loved ones prepare the body, wash and care for the body, perhaps put some ointments on the body, and now, okay, all right, okay. Well, it used to be that families did that for their quote kin, and what people liked about that, as I understand it, was a very individual. It was community centered, because you had that person's community, whether it's a faith community or a neighborhood or a family community. Everybody in those circles got involved in some way, or tried to, and to create that intimacy, that is the word I've used for this study. And I can't imagine anything quite more intimate than preparing a loved one's body for burial. Now, it may feel very uncomfortable to us because it's not what we're used to. But the funny part is the way we are doing it now with embalming and all of that, that is so unnatural. And the funeral homes actually came about in America during the Civil War. I mean, there was embalming in Egypt, and it's been around a long time, but here in America, it came about during the Civil War, when the wealthy families could afford, wanted to bring their loved ones home for burial, and somebody had developed this process, and they could afford to buy it, so that the body could be preserved and then brought home. And it's really a very embalming is really a very distant kind of process. But first of all, the body is away from you, and embalming is really all about, besides the Civil War, in today's world, it's all about helping the family, to see the body as lifelike as the body was. And that is not, it's not accurate, and it's very invasive process. The chemicals like formaldehyde are used. As caskets got more and more ornate, then they started saying, well, we need a vault, because we want the ground to stay level and not have the ground sink in, because we want perfection. We want something that looks very professionally done. And if you read about, I have a link to about the embalming process. Besides, so they pull the blood out of your veins, and then they re-inject your veins with this chemical. They also pull the insides of your organs out and inject this chemical into your organs. And then after all that, you have all these cosmetic things going on that require a lot of movement of the body, of parts of the body. I mean, it's very invasive practice from what in my mind. So anyway, that's how it started. But you know, back like during my great grandfather's time, you know, in the Victorian era, we also had symbols of grief, like black clothing. I'm just showing some of the differences. Okay, so we had wearing black clothing, black jewelry. There sometimes were public mourners. Sometimes people wore a piece of hair as jewelry. And so to me, that's another thing that we've lost in our culture, that it seems to me it is appropriate to have some symbolism, something that's noted that you're grieving, and that people can approach you about your grieving. And now this is my opinion. So I think when now we do want to celebrate a life, but we also need to acknowledge that people are grieving, and maybe we still need to retain some of those symbols that we had to identify family members of a loved one. So anyway, so I find it funny that we have funeral homes, which is not our home. It's in another building, a false environment, because and you have like a visitation that's a set time, and people come through, you shake hands, and you know, it's very structured and procedural, as opposed to a home funeral where you have the people just coming to your home and visiting and sharing and talking. And you know, years ago, there would be food, and there would be people who stayed with you for as long as you needed. And so it's just very different today in the modern environment. I think what the modern way of doing it, the funeral home industry has said, is we want you to keep death at a distance. You know, we're going to do this for you so you don't have to really think about death. We're going to create a lifelike body, just like the person was in life. And it's not going to be anywhere near you. It's going to be out of your home. And it's kind of the way it has to play into our fears about death, because we are, with the modern funeral day movement, we're putting the death somewhere else. So for some people, we lose that connection. So I really find that interesting. So you have funeral homes and home funerals, and they're, you know, it's kind of, a funeral home to me is kind of like an oxymoron, but anyway. So we talked about the different ways of disposition of the body with embalming. We talked about embalming. The other way that people dispose of the body, their choices would be cremation. And that is a more environmentally friendly process than embalming. However, cremation does require a lot of energy It does release dangerous compounds into the atmosphere along with greenhouse gases. However, until we think about going backwards, going back to how it used to be done, that was the better choice, and is all of these things people can have, and I shouldn't really judge one over the other. I'm just trying to tell you what they involve, because I don't want to definitely step on anybody's toes on how they want to be disposed.
Hey,
So
Elly,
you have,
can I ask a question?
yeah,
When you say cremation releases these deadly toxins in the air, I mean, is there not a way that the crematorium can contain those and recycle it or something, or?
I don't have any way. I don't know, Anne.
Okay.
I'm just guessing that that's just part of the process. There is another way that's coming into fashion, or becoming available, but it's not legal in Virginia yet, and that is alkaline hydrolysis. And that's a dissolution of the body. So it's there's water heated at a very high temperature, and it's potassium hydroxide is added. And so it reduces the body to liquid in a few hours if you use that process. And then there are some remains that can be given to the family. That is taking place in some states, but it's not available here. It's probably a matter of time, I would guess, because it's still fairly new. And along those lines, there's also a movement to recompose the body, which means allowing the body to compost, and there's a way that you can do that with the right process very quickly. I mean,
Shouldn't let all the Zoom photos come on? Get rid of that text.
oh, Arnie's just giving me some advice.
Yeah, yeah, more
Okay.
people than-
Oh, yeah. Hi.
Way to go, Arnie.
Yeah. Way to go, Arnie.
You know what? Trying my best.
He has my back.
Yeah.
So in 3 states, Washington, Oregon, and Colorado, they do are getting ready to allow the natural organic reduction, which is composting essentially. And then those remains are used in a way that benefits the environment somewhere, whether it's in a park or your home or wherever, but it's generally meant for a purpose. And then some people would opt for organ and or tissue donation or body donation. I'm not going to talk about that. I don't know a lot about it, but just to add it as one of the options for disposition of the body.
You can
What I
also
am
give
trying,
I was going to say, you can give your body to science.
yeah, that's
what you were talking about, right?
That's to a college or yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Medical, yeah. And so I'm talking about the more intimate way of having burial. And it reminded me of your South American, your African. I'm really nervous about doing this, so forgive me.
Great.
I've had to learn a lot of information in a very quick time. Yeah. So in that experience, it went on for hours, I recall. What else went on that? I hope I'm right when I'm saying it. In your description, it felt like it was a very intimate process.
Yeah. My understanding was that as soon as the person died, I mean, I didn't hear anything about funeral homes. So the body just stayed in the home. And for some reason, they always had funerals on Saturday. I don't know if, that's when people could get off.
Probably.
So depending on when the person died, would be in the home for a long time or a short time.
Right.
But then they brought it to the church on Friday at some point. And then people stayed at the church all night.
Yeah.
Not everybody, obviously, but the
Right.
service was like at 7 a.m. And after the service, then you went to the cemetery. And I don't, it seemed to me that it was, I saw the body lowered into the grave, and my remembrance was it was a fairly simple pine box or
Right. Yeah.
something like that. The funny, I might have mentioned this before, but the funny part was that and there were just many other funerals happening at the same time, so it was sort of an overwhelming experience.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, this man, before the coffin was lowered, jumps into the pit, into the grave. And, I was supposed to be saying a little something, and I was going, what is this guy doing? Do I have to jump into the grave? And this was the second time we went. It's not the time you went, Beverly. Did you go to South Africa, Beverly?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No.
Pat went, but anyway, this was the second time. And anyway, the bottom line was the elder that was sort of taking care of me, she came over because she could see I was kind of turning white, about to pass out. And she put her arm around me and she said, no, I don't know what the guy's doing. Well, it turned out he was one of the grave diggers, and he had lost his cell phone in the grave. And so he wanted to see if he could retrieve the phone before the coffin came in. Anyway, that was kind of, but as we were leaving, there were all these little graves, and those were the children who had died of AIDS, and they did not have coffins for them. They all brought them in little wash basins, and then the wash basins were kind of the tombstone for them with some flowers. So it much more of a home kind of experience through the whole thing, but yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Anne. So what we're talking about with home burial, home funerals, there are many cultures who do that. And that's why I appreciate Anne sharing one example of that.
Yeah.
And another thing, Jews and Muslims, and Arnie can talk a little bit from that Jewish perspective, but their religious law requires them to have a body burial into the ground. And there are other rituals related to that. And sometimes, at least with what I read about Muslims, they may vary from region to region, but it is a requirement that you're buried, or religious law that you're buried in the ground. And Darnie and I were talking about this, another practice that from a Jewish angle that really fits into this model of home burial is sitting Shiva. And I've been to one or two homes where that happened, but I accompanied Arnie, and I thought, no, I found it much more natural.
Thank you.
And personal and intimate than have a time at the funeral home where people come in and pay their respects. So personally, I really like the idea of sitting Shiva with the family. I thought it was very lovely.
Hey, Arnie, did in the Jewish tradition, I mean, I realize it's a quicker turnaround. But I mean, you're buried in a coffin or something, right?
You have to unmute yourself.
Oh. Oh, yeah.
There. I think traditionally you're buried in a coffin of some sort. I don't know if it's required by Jewish law. That I don't know. I know that at Beth El Cemetery, you don't need to be buried in a casket per se. They want some kind of covering over so that the ground doesn't rise up or come down. But I talked to them, they're perfectly happy doing a green burial without in the embalming or.
Okay, thanks. I'm gonna try to, because our time is fairly limited. I'm gonna try to just share some things about home funerals and home burials in terms of what you can and can't do. You can have a body unrefrigerated up to 48 hours. If the body is not going to be buried until after 48 hours, then you have to have it in some kind of refrigeration. A lot of times I've been reading about a dry ice situation. I'm not clear if that is accepted in Virginia. However, with a home burial, it doesn't mean you can't still work with a funeral home for certain tasks. And one of those could be you could store the body in their refrigeration, let's say, because you have family from the other side of the country and you need time for them to get here. So there is a way to do that. And one of the other things I learned is that stood out to me. There are lots of things that I've read, is when you are in the room with a person who's dying, you do not have to do anything right away. You can be there as long as you want, as long as you need. So, I found that if that ever happens to me, I found that very reassuring because, because I think you want to have that sacred moment with your loved one. And some of you may have experienced that type of situation. And the funeral home will take care of the death certificate and a lot of those, little things that relieve you of some of those burdens. So you can have a hybrid kind of thing if you would prefer. So the reason I started this research is, and I think I said this at the beginning, is this is what I want for me. I want a natural burial. I would like to have the home thing. That would be a little bit more of a challenge to get to with my family and situation, but it doesn't preclude that the family could be the Trinity family, so I think I'm just trying to be open-minded about the whole thing and work with Trinity and try to think about what ways can we be more green and intimate and more green and more intimate, more personal in this process. Now, having said that, Trinity is the most compassionate group of people and really support each other. So I don't say what I'm saying is in any way a critique. I couldn't be at a better place. But
Ellie,
one of the,
could
Go
I
ahead.
just add something about when your comment about you have as much time as you want? You do, if you die at home and you're in hospice, then what they ask you to do is to call the hospice nurse that's on call. And they come at some point, and you can stay in your home as long as you want. But, you know, you can't call the hospice person 6 hours after the person has died. I mean, they want you to call them fairly soon after.
Yeah, well, and when I said as long as you want, I was
Yeah.
thinking that it wouldn't be more than half an hour or an
Yeah.
hour. It doesn't mean you have to rush through and
Right.
say, I've got to
Right.
call somebody.
Now, the other thing is that if you're not in hospice and a person dies at home, then you have to call the police. Because
they don't know how the person died.
right, it has to be verified that it wasn't suspicious.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's
So-
the other issue if the person perhaps dies, well, it could be in a wreck, but in the hospital, about getting the body home. I know that when Dan died, I think he was probably already dead when the rescue squad came, but they took him to the hospital and there he was pronounced dead. And I wanted to go in the room where they had him and be with him. And they said, you can go in if you don't touch it. Because they were going to, I don't know why, but you know, that was just really jarring. Like I'm not allowed to touch him, you know. So I think there's just so many angles. Yeah.
Wonder if that's still true today or what the reason for that was, Judy, because that's very interesting.
Well, that was 22 years ago. It could quite very well be different today. But because when my daughter got here and he was at the funeral home, we were allowed to go in and touch him. So
Yeah.
I don't know whether they were thinking they were going to do an autopsy. I don't know. But I was too upset to really think much about that.
Of course.
I remember it being problematic and curious, but
Yeah.
also very upset at me that they wouldn't let me touch.
Well, and this information I'm sharing, I mean, that's part of the reason. We want it not to be that way. We want it to be smooth sailing and what the family needs at the time. So anyway,
let me just add one more thing. I mean, I've had obviously several members of Trinity who have died in the hospital. And one person I remember, all the children wanted to come and see her before they took her to the funeral home. And that required staying in the room, I'd say 4 to 5 hours. And the hospital was very accepting of that. So, yeah.
That's good.
I think it's really nice that people have choices and that they're aware of the choices. And I know some people in cultures other than mainstream Western cultures who attended home burials and where people were not embalmed and found them very troubling. So I guess home burial is not a choice for everyone, but if someone wants that, then it's good that they know it's available.
Mm-hmm.
Right, Stephanie, that's a good point. And I suspect part of the reason it is difficult for people is it because it isn't the practice that we're using mostly in modern America, but but certainly people need to make the choice. Excuse me, it's right for them. So as I was trying to get to I started this research and reading for my own interest and trying to figure out what it would take to have simple burial, natural burial at Trinity. And one of the reasons, besides the environmental reasons of it being not using chemicals, et cetera, one of my reasons was, and I told this to my family and they like, oh, that should be in your tombstone, which of course I won't have, but when I die, I want to keep on giving back. And so I see myself decomposing in the ground And I see that there could be something planted in near or around where I'm decomposing. And what a beautiful symbol that is to me, to see there is life after death, to know that it's not the end. And I know that that term resurrection is complex, but this offers one glimpse into how it might be looked about. It certainly gave me some comfort to think about it that way. And a lot of the people books I've read or articles talk about it, the green burial movement, as a way to have connection with community, to have connections with the earth, to respect the earth. And it is, and some have said it's a way for families to talk about resurrection. So I thought, yeah, so that was kind of interesting. I have some good quotes here if we have a few minutes. So if you're having an at-home funeral, you can, besides caring for the body, you could have a shroud, and family members or community members could decorate the shroud if that's what they want, paint something on it or put a message with it, or, so there are lots of ideas that you can do to also connect with that person that you loved. And you can also do that with whatever casket you use. I mean, you want to only use a cardboard casket or a very simple pine or wood box, something that also is going to biodegrade. There are baskets that people use, and you can picture, I can almost picture that like the basket Moses was in, but it's bigger.
Yeah.
And people in your family or your circle actually carry you to the gravesite. And so it's not a funeral home people, in their suits and everything. It's people that we have a relationship with who are doing all of this.
I might add that Trinity had, I think they still do, a shroud that was made by Emily Gilkerson. And we used it quite a bit when people did not want to spend a lot of money on flowers or something. And that would be over the casket. Now, obviously, when it went to be buried, then we took it off.
Yeah. That's cool. You'll have to unmute, Beverly.
Okay. Am I muted or unmuted?
You're okay.
We can hear you.
Okay, well, that also came to my mind. I'm glad Anne mentioned it. And it was certainly, I think, at a time when more people were being buried as opposed to the
cremation.
Yeah, cremation. And yeah, I'm glad some of us know about it, and maybe now more of us will know about it if and when it was appropriate. And right, Emily did it, and you know more about it than I do, but it was a beautiful thing. And in a sense, it was sort of everybody that it was used for. It was sort of like you didn't have huge bouquets versus smaller bouquets. It was sort of a common denominator of love and thought. Mm-hmm. So thank you for mentioning that. Mm-hmm. And can I say something else?
Well, first of all, let me just say you said that very beautifully, and of course you can say something else.
Well, I mean, we're all thinking about, what's going to happen or whatever, and we don't know, but I made some plans so that Lauren wouldn't have to. And I know where to tell her, to contact her or something. I already have my headstone down in a cemetery in Richmond where my family, one side of the family goes back to the 1780s in a plot. And I can say, because I shouldn't be jocular about it, but on the other hand, I want half of my ashes to go into the Trinity, whatever you call it. And
Memorial Garden.
yeah, and I want half of my ashes to go to this place in Richmond where I have ancestors that go back a long way, and she knows that. And who knows what's going to happen and when, but at least, we're thinking about it. And that thinking is plural, we.
Right. Yeah, that has launched this study for me. And Beverly, I'm glad that you said that, because I failed to mention the Memorial Garden and how that concept, or that process that Trinity went through to develop and have a Memorial Garden, is helping me with this, to say, well, how can we take it a step further? Potentially. I mean, I know it's a process, but I know that Duck Run is available, and I wouldn't say no to Duck Run necessarily, but I would feel, as a living person, I would feel much more comfortable at a Trinity land than I would anywhere else. So, but I'm not compromising on the green burial. So that's what I would hope.
Thank you.
We have gone past our time and a little bit, and so next week, instead of having the share with the pastor, or talking about what people want to talk about, share ideas and what you've experienced, we'll start off with what regulatory issues are involved with having a natural burial on private property. I've done a lot of research on that. I think I have it nailed down. So want to share that with you all. And then I won't be shy about it, want to see if anybody would be interested in being on a committee to have this added to the environmental plan, the plan for Trinity property, and how we can move forward with that process. So that's what I have in mind. But
Elly?
Here's one of the.
Sorry, it's Mary here at the church house. I apologize. We were having technical difficulties and didn't get on until about 11:35. So I know we're running over, and I don't want to take up too much time, but I just wanted to see if Roxanne or John or Mark had any questions for the group before we signed off for today. No, thank you. No, all right. Thank you for your patience. I appreciate it.
No, I appreciate that.
Yeah. We're still here.
Okay, so I'm going to end with this quote I found. There's a magazine called The Bitter Southerner, and it's a really cool magazine. And there was an article in it called "Piecing Together the Green Burial Movement." And the article was written by Olivia Milloway, but she quotes other people. And so this is my favorite quote in this article. And the quote is attributed to Wendy Edson, founder and owner of Phoenix Funeral Services in Conyers, Georgia. And it goes like this: each green burial is a promise to the living, a promise that is kept every day the sun rises and the trees grow. When I die, I want to make this promise. I want to be buried in a green cemetery with an outdoor service. I want a tulip poplar casket with a bouquet of irises and magnolias, and for Dolly Parton's wildflowers to play while my family lowers me into the grave. I want to donate my carbon and nitrogen to a tree that might someday be a jungle gym for a bored grandchild being dragged along for a visit. That really spoke to me. Anything else before we say goodbye? Well, we'll carry on next Sunday then.
Thank you, Elly.
Yeah, great
Oh,
job,
you're welcome.
Elly.
Thank
Oh,
you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Okay.
so much.
Bye.
Bye.